Well, hello, World Summit AI Conference, Amsterdam. Yeah, that would be us. So wherever you came from, glad you're here. I'm your chair for this section of the track called Economy, Employment, and Equity. And you know, it's after lunch, right? So we're kind of tired, but get back engaged. Here it goes. Yes. So we have a panel. Who am I? Well, I'm Kevin Jones, Director of Center for Teaching and Learning, Associate Professor of Management at Indiana University, Columbus in the U.S. And I'll be here right up to the afternoon break. So, kicking things off, our panel. Who do we have? Well, first, they're going to be dealing with the subject of reshaping global economies. What is the impact of AI on advanced and low-income economies? So, here to introduce the panel and moderate the conversation, please put your hands together for, and I should know how to pronounce this name since I was raised in a city called Grand Rapids, Michigan, which has one of the largest Dutch populations in the United States. Gabi Zijderveld.
Wow, Kevin, I'm impressed. You pronounced that well. Very impressive. Hello, everyone. Please come up. I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel, Tim McGarr, Christopher Obereder, and Paul Verhagen. So thank you all for joining us today. It's a massively fascinating topic that we could probably spend hours on debating, but I think there's a pretty obvious elephant in the room that I wanted to address on behalf of the panel. Unfortunately, Ida couldn't join us, and as a result, we have 4 people from advanced income, as we are describing it in this panel, advanced income countries, discussing a topic that should also touch on lower income countries that we don't necessarily have a cultural or lived experience in, so we wanted to acknowledge that, and it's really a bummer that Ida couldn't travel to the Netherlands to join us for the conversation, because her perspective, also from the UNESCO, would have been hugely additive to our conversation. That being said, we had a really great prep call, and there's some really interesting themes that we uncovered that also touch on everyone's unique domain expertise. So what I wanted to do is just start by having everyone introduce themselves briefly, and then we're just going to have each of our panelists tee up a theme, talk about it out of their own domain expertise, and then the other panelists get to comment, and we're going to try and do our best. If someone, Ivana, if you guys can give us a time check maybe, so we can leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, I think that would be great, so we can have a discussion with the audience as well. So please, let's kick off.
Good afternoon. So I'm Tim McGarr from BSI. So we are offering assurance in AI and working towards being an AI notified body, and my role is around product and strategy.
Thank you. So my name is Chris. I'm an investor. I started as a founder 15 years ago, sold 2 of my startups, and now since 5 years we're mainly investing in AI startups. So I'll talk a bit about the startup side, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Paul Verhagen. I work for the University of Amsterdam, and my function is to be between policymakers and technicians. So I have a combined background in both politics as well as deep artificial intelligence, mathematics. And I try and work on AI for public good.
Excellent, thank you. So to launch right into it, Tim, give us some, share us your thoughts and where you see it going in terms of the regulatory landscape and the impact it has on, both lower income countries and more advanced income countries.
Thank you. So the regulation space in AI is moving quite a lot. Even a few years ago, there was this kind of debate around whether we need to let AI flourish and get all the economic benefits or deal with some of the social issues. And we're now in a situation where there's a real vision of the need to regulate AI, and there are roughly 70 countries that are going through regulation at the moment. And behind that, there's also the need to ensure that the regulators are properly funded. So one of the issues that we're also seeing is the fact that the regulation comes through. If it's not properly funded, then it doesn't actually work because people don't trust the regulation. And there's been a big investment in the EU, UK, US, and other places to do that. And it's obviously more difficult for certain lower income economies to do that. The other sort of big potential issue around lower income economies is the fact that the debate around the regulation of AI has really been pushed by the larger economies who've got big AI sectors, and there's a competition about who can regulate AI and the way that they regulate it. So regulate the competition between the approach of properly fully regulating it and having a much more hands-off approach. And to a certain extent, lower income economies have not been involved in that conversation. And where there has been conversations, it's been between, say, the UK and the EU and the US rather than those economies. The only way that that is kind of getting better is the fact that the OECD has AI principles, which are being pushed out in terms of regulation, and quite recently the UN has tried to get much more of a voice around the way it's regulated. And the final thing I want to sort of touch on was the EU AI Act. So obviously that goes well beyond the EU, so it's been written in such a way that it deliberately exports regulation in the same way that the General Data Protection Regulation did. And this has a huge impact beyond the EU and will potentially raise the bar about how AI is regulated around the world. And we are seeing organisations who are saying, we will follow this regulation, and if we do it here, we're sorted for everywhere else. And in terms of being involved in that regulation, there are some good parts in terms of lower income economies. So it's built around standards, certification and accreditation, primarily European standards, but also international standards. All economies are involved in those. There is the debate that goes into the standards, which will then come through to regulation. And also around accreditation. So accreditation, there are international structures around this, which means that there is a kind of level playing field of how accreditation works around the world. The only open question is about the need to work with a notified body in terms of getting your products into the market. So we're working towards being a notified body, and it's not entirely clear if they have to be EU-based or can be anywhere else. So that could be a bit of a barrier as well. But I think overall, having regulation that is consistent is good for all economies and all businesses, and hopefully we'll get to that eventually.
Great. I have a question for you to lead into that, but first I'd like to see if our other panelists would like to shed some thoughts on the topics.
Okay. So yeah, basically I want to dive a bit into the startup space also, how startups are changing the field. And if we look at low income, like I'm trying to also answer the question there a bit. So the low income and the advanced income economies, basically I see three aspects where it's having the most impact, and it's one, the education side, then the healthcare side, and then I would also say agriculture. And I brought you two examples how startups are already changing for example, the agricultural landscape. So basically, nowadays we have still 260 million people that have no direct access to education these days. And in this field, AI is really making waves. Also some startups that we are looking at, they're really helping that. But I want to give you some examples that you've never heard. And one of them is, for example, in marine life. There's a startup, and there's a few already doing something similar. They have AI drones, and they're flying along the coastline, and they basically detect illegal fishing activities, and that's like changing marine life in these areas, and that's low income and advanced because the coastlines, to protect them, would be very costly, and last year they would have had to spend 500 million euros to basically guard the coastlines as they already did, and these startups are basically doing that now. I find that quite interesting. That's something you wouldn't think of, and it's already changing a lot there. And also, one area is, for example, like crop disease detection. Last year, 30%, the yields were 30% higher in low-income economies due to startups that supported them on like crop disease detection. So that's a few areas. I want to give you some examples that are like actually happening and that are having impact. We can dive into this more, but that's a few interesting examples that I find fascinating. That we can talk also about like personalized learning and many different things, but that's something that's it can also have like save the marine life with AI. So.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, maybe we can dive deeper, maybe also out of the audience there's questions on that and we can open that up in a bit. But Paul, please comment on anything that the prior speakers have said and some themes.
So the question I would have for Tim is the minimal ambition for regulations that it's slowing down innovation. That's sort of the trope that we always find ourselves in. So how would you look at a type of regulatory framework that is much more directive, as in it has a goal? It is somewhere that we wish to go to. Because this is one of my critiques of the EU-AI Act, is that it's small c conservative. It tries to prevent the worst harms, which is good. It puts a floor. It does not tell you where you are going. From the startup perspective, I'm mostly kind of interested on how do you actually harness this for public good, where profit incentives are not necessarily part of the public good. How do you incorporate this in something that is not just ethics washing and greenwashing? Now, as an academic, I cannot, of course, resist to introduce a concept. So the concept I wish to introduce here is something called capital labor substitution. We are talking about the impact of AI on low and advanced economies, and these impacts will be context dependent. Within the context of industrialized countries, we are talking about tight labor markets, and from that perspective, it makes sense to replace labor with AI. That's what we're talking about, job loss. From a country like India, or from a country like China that has massive unemployment among youth, why on earth would you be replacing labor with machines? It makes absolutely zero sense to do. So the discussion that we're having in the West that's very heavily focused on job loss is very particular to the economic structures that we have in the West and do not speak for the rest of the world. You could solve this a different way through migration, which is unpopular, which is in part why we're having this discussion. But I'll introduce this concept for now because it really sort of illustrates that there is a vast difference between advanced and low-income economies. They do not play by the same rules. They do not have the same incentives when it comes to technology, nor the same means to actually develop them in autonomous ways. So I'll leave it there for now.
Cool. So I saw you nodding. Would you like to comment?
There's a few things, though, sort of both of those that would be quite good to bring in terms of sort of the impact of AI. Some fantastic examples, and like education, another area which is lacking skilled staff is healthcare, where AI can help massively by improving the access to healthcare, improving what is available, for taking jobs which require a skilled person to do, using AI instead to actually bring healthcare to an audience that doesn't normally have it. And I think I definitely agree about the debate about jobs moving over, and the fact is that AI is probably going to have a bigger impact in advanced economies and could potentially lead to more jobs in lower income economies as the work changes and gets shifted over. So it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I would also just also quickly touch on that. Also, what Tim mentioned, that in the healthcare space, that's quite interesting, and it's predicted that 15 million lives can be saved in low-income economies in the next until 2030. So every year, 15 million. That would be quite fascinating. And then also what Paul mentioned. Right now, there's a statistic that last year, 200 million women in India actually got. Is it not 200 million? Basically, a lot of people in India got new jobs in that AI field, and they're working from home. So it's like work from home mothers often and women, and they are working from home in that field. I find it also interesting because it enables a lot of remote work, the AI space, and that's quite interesting. I also find your aspect very interesting on like the conflict between machine and person, and how is it when in these economies. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, one thing we talked about as well, kind of building a little bit of that, right, is the tension between human and machine and the impact on human lives, but also what, Paul, you commented on is kind of the impact of AI on social fabric, right? And it'd be great if you could share some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always think about when thinking about technology in a large sense, not just AI, is that the foundation of any society is technological in nature. And you can see this if the power goes out. it is a total disaster. If you have no Wi-Fi, no internet, it is very difficult to actually sustain your way of life without technology. And that means that technology is the foundation for the social fabric, and that changes in the technological foundation cause change in the social fabric and vice versa. And an excellent example of this is actually privacy. So privacy in the 60s was whether or not the CIA or the FBI was spying on you. Privacy in these days is whether or not big tech knows things about you or the government knows things about you. It's a completely different paradigm. It's usually elevated to the level of a fundamental right within the EU, but that's a pretty new thing. So new rights emanate from these technological changes. This again goes back to the difference between advanced and low-income economies. The social fabric and the economic fabric, which are tied together, are vastly different, and that means these changes are going to be different as well. In a country like India, where, for instance, it could empower more workforce participation by women, this is, broadly speaking, a good thing. This is a positive application of AI that has equality impacts. However, if you start replacing migrant flows from the low-income world to the advanced income world, migration is one of the ways that we reduce global inequality. Removing that will increase inequality, and quite dramatically as well. So these are choices, and pure economic logic will not drive you to the same place as it would in other places.
Fascinating, fascinating. So going back to what you were just talking about, right? And I'd like to get both your perspectives on it. So tremendous, this is one of the themes we did talk about as well, tremendous opportunity for positive impact, societal change, there's going to be good, there's going to be bad, political impact, maybe best not to go down that rabbit hole today. But what do you see are the risks, and especially if you look at the lower income countries where there's maybe even restrictions in terms of infrastructure, access to compute power, you name it. What do you think are the risks, and how do we then, as folks on the regulatory landscape, in tech investment, in policy, in the work we all do, how do we ensure that these risks are addressed appropriately?
Yeah. So that's also a bit going back also to what Paul mentioned, is also the privacy area, of course, privacy and also data protection. But in these economies, we're talking about the low-income economies, the first thing is to get them onto the internet, and there's still over 2.5 billion people that have no access to the internet, so they need to first get onboarded. It's also still, there's over 1 billion, 1.4 billion that are still unbanked. That's another issue. So to benefit from the AI space and these technologies, they need to get basically basic access to the internet with low price smartphones. That's how many got onboarded onto the internet. But yeah, I think that's still something that's missing. And in the of course high income economies, everyone has access to the internet, so that's not an issue. But the infrastructure issue that we are having here is that many don't have any access, and then there's not so much benefit on the AI, from AI. Of course, agricultural aspects, they're using it more and more, but this is and we're talking about the general public, and many in the general public, the farmers, many of them, they have smartphone access, but if you look at lower income, then many don't have access, and it's hard for them to benefit there. I think unless, of course, they benefit from healthcare aspects, healthcare and education. If we can support them on that, then that's also good. Yeah, but that's maybe. Tim, you want?
Yeah, Tim, from a regulatory perspective, how do we manage the risks?
Some of this it goes even beyond regulation. It's about the lack of infrastructure that's there. So obviously, internet's very important. I mentioned about the lack of regulatory infrastructure, but there are sort of common issues around, if you're going to have the AI industry, which is very important at the moment, you need to have power supply, water, constant power, and there's certain issues that are common across the world, like getting chips, getting expertise, which are very hard to do. And I don't think regulation is going to help some of those. It could help by potentially levelling the playing field, making it easier for people to come in. But there's still a lot beyond regulation to do as well.
Yeah, long way to go. Paul?
So from the perspective of low-income economies, I would see two forms of risk. The first is your just dependence on Western big tech. It's forms of data colonialism. So just to illustrate this, the training cost for electricity associated with the ChatGPT 4 type model is like $100 million. Training, that's without the nerds, without the GPUs, without your data. That means that development of AI is out of reach of all but basically the G7 and Goldman Sachs, those types of entities. There's no way you can do this even if you wanted to do this on a local level. You just don't have the means. That means you become quite subject to having your data extracted by Western companies for profit. There is no free and available public sector AI. The second risk is that AI in its current iteration has a tendency to be highly corrosive to liberal democracies. Misinformation, polarization, institutions being hollowed out. This stuff is really bad for an open infosphere. And on the flip side, it is very strengthening for autocratic regimes. A state like China or Russia can do predictive policing, it can detect dissidents online. So AI also increases the allure of autocratic rule because it strengthens it. There is a discussion going on here about who can innovate their system, their political system, into the 21st century. And so far, the West, despite having the technology, which is the paradox, we're losing. The West is losing it because there is no public sector application of AI for the good. It becomes the sort of positive externality of corporate activity that it's good, but it's not the purpose in and of itself. So risk for both us as well as for the low-income economies.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think we're ready to open it up for some questions from the audience. If someone has a microphone, are there any questions? Any skepticism, any concerns, any...
I think there's a microphone coming to you, sir.
Is a microphone coming?
Thank you. Very interesting panel. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I wanted to ask you just an opinion on the idea of job shifts. So at the beginning we talked about, rather you talked about the idea that in a lesser developed country like India or some sub-Saharan African countries, jobs could be lost and not created because of AI. But what do you think about the flip side in terms of the efficiency that is generated and the ability for a country to leapfrog by using AI in the sense that, for example, one doctor can treat 100 times more patients by using AI fully. In a country where there are not enough doctors, that makes a radical change. How do you feel about that? Do you think that that is a big enabler? That's one question. And the other one, the adjacent question, you talked about marine life, drones. I'm very interested in that. I once had the opportunity to spend some time with a Somali pirate. And interestingly, what the Somali pirates told me is, look, we're forced to do piracy because the waters that were our traditional fishing waters have been swamped by foreign fishing vessels, and we have no other way of sustaining our families. So is this being used, and do you know if piracy is a target or if it's diminishing because of this technology already?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, you can start if you want.
Okay, sure.
It's the first part of the question, and then...
There are definite positives, right? There could be ways in which you could accelerate, leapfrogging is what you called it. There is evidence of this happening in Africa as well, with skipping entirely to mobile phones instead of going to PCs. So there's evidence of this as well. This is not just a thing, though, in the developing economies. It's also a thing in advanced economies, because the social safety net that we created after the Second World War was based on many more people working than there will be in the future. We have shrinking populations. If you want to maintain the same level of healthcare quality at the same price point in the Netherlands, there are projections that by 2050, half of all Dutch citizens need to work in healthcare. There's no way you can do this. This is not possible. So barring a massive political change, a change in migration or different type of structure or cutting benefits, you're going to have to find a way to increase the productivity per worker in healthcare, and your only way realistically is technology. There are very few other ways you could think of in which you can do this. This is also the case in low-income economies, but they have a different kind of problem. And that neatly brings me to the second SDG that AI is very bad for, which is education. There are doctors being trained in the developing world, but they are often brain drained away to the rich world. right? You would have to find ways to actually keep talent local, and you could use AI for that, sure. There's ways to do that, but again, in a place where you have labor surplus, you have a different kind of issue than sort of this efficiency problem. Efficiency means making the most of the limited tools you have. It's not that they don't have enough people to work for it, it's that they're not educated enough, for various different reasons.
Yeah, thanks again also for bringing up the marine life. So how they are handling it right now is like only large-scale piracy is like, if it's like small scale and for private use, they're not looking at that. Like if they're just trying to survive and feed their families, they're not looking for that. They're looking for actually, if you go for protected areas and protected wildlife and you're going really after that, and if it's commercial and large scale, these smaller ones, they're neglecting that for now. They're not infringing, like they're not trying to find the small scale, just family fathers trying to survive. They're looking for like large container like large ships and overfishing everything. So just that's what they're looking for. And like flying around the coastline or driving it through it would be impossible. Like the drone can do, like they have stations, they basically charge up there, they have charging stations and then they fly every day. And it's like a lot cheaper for the drones. But the drone technology, there's a lot happening, so that's interesting. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's really nice discussion here. I have a question. I often hear a slogan like, use AI, you will be more productive, you will be more efficient, and so on. So if every one of us will be 10 times more efficient, yes, who will profit the most? People or companies? That's efficiency what? We say that it's very good, be efficient, be and so on. I think you understand.
I think it's a super interesting question. I have an opinion on that, but I'll refrain for now. Maybe I'll comment at the end. But why don't we each shed our thoughts on that?
Potentially it could be both. Hopefully it will free up our time to do things that are more interesting and get rid of some dull parts of all our lives. But you know, the massive investment which Paul mentioned that's going into AI, that's not being done for the hell of it. People expect a return on that investment. So hopefully there will be benefit for individuals and for the organisations, but as a lot with AI, it's very hard to see what's going to happen in the future. That's one thing I've learned in the last few years anyway.
Yeah, I would also agree with Tim on that it's like you both profit, both benefit, but I would say the statistics say that you get 40% more efficient right now if you use it correctly. Like that's overall general, but I would say if you could use it correctly, you can actually get a lot higher than that. And I think it's also good, like you have more free spare time, more free time if you can do the workload that you had to do before. Of course, at some point the employers they will know, okay, everyone's getting more efficient and we need to increase the workloads. But for now, you have more time, and I think I got a lot more productive also on the email side, like spell checking. Everything is getting more productive, and so I would say I hope actually that the economies can get like a leapfrog and can grow faster due to AI. So I think we're all getting more efficient, so hopefully the economy can benefit from it. But it's a global phenomenon, of course. Maybe that's it. Let's see what you are going to say on that one. No.
One of the nice things about neoliberal capitalism is that it's highly efficient. It's an optimization engine. It optimizes profit, and it's very good at this. We've seen inequality rise since the fall of the Cold War, end of the Cold War. Whereas we have not seen productivity rise per se, and you could question whether things like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook are actually productivity gaining, or they suck out all your productivity. What I think you're asking in some ways is kind of, are we over-indexing on inefficiency in and of itself? I think one of the interesting things that is worth reflecting on is that we tend to think as innovation only in technical terms. More stuff, more efficiency, more... there is no real vehicle for social innovation. Right? There are ways to answer technical questions. There are profit incentives of PhDs, institutions, academia. Who does the social innovation? We have not really seen a wholesale restructuring in our political economy in decades, certainly not in the West. We have sort of talked ourselves into kind of like efficiency. As long as we do free trade and efficiency, everyone will benefit because a rising tide lifts all boats. We are now at the end of that free trade paradigm. It's going to be a question. In short, the answer to your question, who's going to benefit, under the current paradigm, corporations, because corporations maximize profit and they're extremely good at it. And we have no way to combat that unless you change your political economy.
Yeah, thank you for questions. And you said that people will have more time left for themselves. Have you heard about any data between correlation, how AI spreads and the free time we get?
Gosh, I think the question is maybe too broad to answer. I think it depends on what industries, what type of work, what type of productivity, what countries, you name it. I'm sure data exists out there, but nothing, I think, generic that speak to that. The one thing I wanted to add is maybe more, it's a topic I think that's interesting to maybe philosophize about a little bit, is that at the end of the day, there's a lot of inequalities that exist between employees and corporations today, prior to AI, right? And I think in how we build and how we deploy AI, there's an opportunity for us to rethink as well how we do that so that we don't perpetuate the human biases that exist. Because at the end of the day, AI is still being built by humans. It's trained by humans. It's deployed by humans, so it's food for thought.
One thing I would like to add is that we sometimes underestimate the existential value of having a job. Right, this idea, oh, we'll have universal basic income and all the people that work in steel factories can go and write poetry or whatever. Have you met a steel worker? They're not going to write poetry. They take pride in their occupation, and moving them away is a fundamental attack on their identity and their way of life, and they have no desire to re-educate to become service sector. This is not necessarily an economics question. This is sort of a question of belonging. And change is quite rapid as it happens right now. Maybe too rapid for us to deal with.
Yeah. I think we might have time for one more question if there is one. Yeah, one more question? Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. It's Oktay from DataStax. We are hearing huge budgets and investments around AI, and the balance of the economy can change in the world. And that means that the economical of the countries that are not technical advanced enough will be worse off in a time. And the imbalance in the world will increase even more after that. And do you agree with that? Or if yes, why? And if not, why you don't agree?
Will global inequality go up is what you're asking. What you're seeing, in a way, is a form of inequality, is essentially a separation in the world, something that looks quite a lot like the Cold War. There are public sector applications of AI. They exist in China. They are things like social credit systems. They are things like facial recognition systems. They are recognized as being public sector applications. They're not recognized as being public good applications. They do not conform to any set of Western values. But they are public sector. So what you're seeing more and more is sort of this splitting into a paradigm that's the US and Europe, nominally on one side, that is a privacy paradigm, and one in Asia, primarily led by the Chinese, that is absent of any privacy and very oriented around sort of social stability kinds of things. This is a form of inequality, namely two different systems. If you're referring to economic inequality, I think it's quite evident that without thinking about a social application, this will increase. But this is two different kinds of inequality that you're talking about. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
Anyone else care to comment?
I would add one more thing also on the economic inequality side. Right now, if you look at the funding flows, where the funding is going, it's like still around 90% are going into those high-income economies in the AI space. So that's still a massive inequality, and that should be changed. That's still a problem because that creates more inequality. If the funding goes into those economies, then it generates a benefit there. But the others would need it urgently. So that's also adding more inequality on that side, unfortunately. But the trend is, our friend, like right now, it's like the other. Basically, it's getting less in high-income economies percentage-wise. So it's getting in the right direction.
Any further thoughts? No? It's a wrap then. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and panel, you tackled a topic which is not easy to talk about, but it's a necessary topic to talk about. So continue to engage these folks as you see them walking around and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you.